Nauru is truly a treasure island when it comes to how many mysteries this tiny speck of land holds. Even though its history is relatively well documented, there are still some blank periods which hold so much more we are not sure of. Let's have a closer look at some of the island riddles and enigmas. This presentation doesn't pretend to be any kind of scientific or academic research, yet it is a result of a relatively deep dive study of respective subjects of Nauruan history. Why do we need to know our history? In order to teach our children what they shall become, we need to know who we are, and this knowledge lies within our history. The information provided during the course of this presentation doesn't claim to be conclusive of all Nauruan history. Instead, it poses several questions that are yet to be answered and might still reveal some mysteries. Part 1. The first contact with Europeans. It is a widely accepted event that the very first contact of Nauruans with Europeans occurred in 1798 when Captain John Fern on the Snow Hunter sighted Nauru and named it Pleasant Island after a brief contact. Yet, was he the very first European which did so? Even John Fern himself said, from their invitation to touch, and considering that the island lies right in the track from New Zealand, or New Holland, to China, I think some ship may have been there before us. Let's assume that John Fern was really the first navigator who took the coordinates of Nauru which led to its appearance on then-present maps. Analysis of more than 400 maps dated between 1607 and 1860 shows that on 116 maps there were several islands charted in the vicinity of Pleasant Island, Shank Island, Ocean or High Island, Atlantic Island, Nameless or Grunen Island, Jesus Island and Clark's Reef. Nauru and Banaba are located in a so-called Nauru Basin, and these two islands are quite isolated from the others by 420 kilometers minimum and lay apart from each other within 290 kilometers. On this section of the map, Nauru is shown as an orange circle and Banaba as a green one, while small triangles around them are the islands of modern-day Tuvalu, Kiribati, Marshall Islands, Micronesia, Papua New Guinea and Solomon Islands. Precision of maps produced in 19th century is relatively low comparing to the present-day maps, yet coordinates of Nauru and Banaba taken from 95 and 73 maps published before 1860 display the islands in their correct locations. However, many historic maps, at the same time, contain some other islands besides Nauru and Banaba exactly in the same area. The very first time Shank Island was mentioned in 1801 by Mr. Sharp on the Hope, and since 1813 it was charted alone or together with Pleasant Island nearby. But unlike Pleasant Island, it was rarely referenced in any publication, and ultimately, it was associated with Pleasant Island. Its simultaneous presence with Pleasant Island on the maps can only be explained by simple copying from one map to another without validation. Atlantic Island was sighted by an eponymous whaler in 1828 and since 1832 was charted along with other islands in the same area where only Nauru and Banaba are located. It is not found on many nautical charts and it was evidently regarded as a mistake around 1859. However, considering its proximity to Pleasant and Shank Islands on the maps and remoteness from other islands, can it be Nauru? Did Atlantic cite Pleasant Island and added it as a new island to the confusion? An island, called Jarvis Island, and a shoal or reef seen by Captain Clark were charted on the maps starting from 1832. In 1834, Admiral Abel Orbit du Petithours could not find the reef, sounding 200 fathoms. Could Clark Reef be on Tongjava, Nukumanu, or Kapingamarangi, which are 440 to 570 kilometers away? Or west longitude was confused with the east while charting? It is unlikely to be Pleasant or Ocean Islands, however it shows so well how errors were made in coordinates taking in the first half of 19th century. From 1803 an island from an unknown discoverer was charted as Nameless Island, or Grunen, or Bianai and Sydney Islands. It was noted as doubtful in 1851, yet some later maps still contained it. Could it be another example of coordinates transposition from west to east longitude, or was it Banaba? Jesus Island was sighted by Alvaro de Mendaña in 1568, placing it 160 Spanish leagues from the Bojas de Candelaria, which is on Tongjava. Krusenstern doubted its existence and placed it in the list of his interrogatory positions. It was noted as doubtful in 1851. Since late 19th century, geographers suppose it was Nukufata or Nui Islands. How could it be possible that in the area where only 2 islands exist, there were 7 islands charted? precision of taking the coordinates was not perfect in 16th to 19th centuries, while cartographers kept putting all islands on the Pacific map which they could learn of, or hear of, or copy from all the possible sources. Clearly enough, they could not dig deep enough in all the information available about each and every Pacific island out of 30,000. Since Ferdinand Magellan crossed the Pacific Ocean in 1520 to 1521, groups of islands started appearing on the charts. This particular map of Grande Mer was prepared and presented to the Academy of Science in Paris on September 5, 1744 by Philippe Boische. It could be just another antique map of the Pacific, only if not one, but this 1744 map, besides Jesus Island, has another unlabeled island charted very close to the equator. Since dead reckoning was the main process of calculating the coordinates, position of unlabeled island can be georeferenced from Jesus and Isabel Islands, and, surprisingly, it appears to be in the area of Nauru and Banaba. Jesus Island is shown as a yellow circle which is in the same area where many maps showed it, and unlabeled island is displayed as a purple circle right next to the real location of Nauru. A little bit more attention is deserved by Alvaro de Mendaña voyage across Pacific in 1568. Jesus Island was the very first island they sighted since having left Peru, and their exact route until this island is very hard to reconstruct due to multiple factors such as imperfect coordinates taking, over-reliance to dead reckoning, and lack of other known places that could help to understand the real location. However, after Jesus Island, Alvaro de Mendaña reached Bajos de Candelaria, and, ultimately, Santa Isabel and Solomon Islands. The route between these three locations is well documented by different voyage parties. Undoubtedly, Bajos de Candelaria is Ontong Java Atoll, and doing reverse engineering of the route back to Jesus Island places it where it is shown on 1744 map. Yet, there is no any island in this particular location. How that is possible, as the distances between Jesus Island and Bajos de Candelaria cannot be that wrong. One of the possibilities is that latitude taking was imprecise, and slightly rotating this route can place Jesus Island in the vicinity of Nauru and Banaba. Could it be one of those? Descriptions of Jesus Island are quite detailed yet cannot help much in identifying the island. It says, the island is low and flat, no more than 6 leagues in circumference, and has many reefs around. Facing the island, it has a shape like 2 galleys, with a copse in the middle which appears like a fleet of ships. The question of when there was the first contact of Nauruans with Europeans is likely to remain unanswered. Was it John Fern on the Snow Hunter in 1798? Or some other vessel not long before 1744? Or Alvaro de Mendaña in 1568? Part 2. Uninvited visitors. After John Fern visit and until Germany took a possession of Nauru, more than 65 vessels visited the island in a time span of 90 years. Some of them were almost harmless explorers and whalers, others were runaway convicts, beachcombers, and even blackbirders. As more ships started crossing the Pacific establishing various routes, while nearby waters were frequented by whalers, Nauru started seeing foreigners making the island their home too. There are no written sources about white settlers before 1829, but after that and until German annexation, those 60 years can be divided into 3 periods. Period of 1829 to 1842 can be associated with the first whalers and runaway convicts, with the most notorious personages as John Jones and Patrick Burke. There were up to 50 whites living on the island at some time, but not many stayed long. With exile of John Jones and arrival of William Harris, another dark period commenced. Whites could not survive long enough. William Harris proclaimed himself a king. Within this period, one event happened that brought Pleasant Island to the front lines of many nautical magazines in 1850s: the capture and massacre of the brig Inga, which was instigated by the whites. After that, a period of quiet times established till 1872, an arrival of Ernest Stephen and independent traders. Not many white settlers can be identified by names with their respective stories, yet some of them are quite notable. Undoubtedly, the longest white settler on Nauru was a runaway convict from Norfolk Penal Settlement, William Harris. His story is quite well known, especially to his descendants. Seems that Harris knew about Nauru existence from other escapees from Norfolk. The earliest recorded escapee from there was John Jones, or Dacey, who was brought to Norfolk on Cornwallis after being sentenced in 1800 in Ireland. Interestingly, Mr. Sharp on the Hope, who named Nauru Shank Island in 1801, was a surgeon on the very same Cornwallis. Coincidence? Another mysterious person appears to be a young lad called Bax or LeBurn, who nearly forgot his English. Seems he arrived to Nauru together with Jones being 10 to 11 years old boy and was kept by Nauruans in the interior of the island on Jones' order. Later, Nauruans grew very fond of Backs and didn't let him mingle with other whites. There are records about him at least until 1843 when John Jones was already expelled off the island and William Harris arrived. What happened to him later? Mystery. Part 3. Districts. Why are there 14 districts on Nauru? Were they correlated to 12 tribes in any way? Usually, this question is met by shrugging shoulders and a mere "I don't know." In 1890, German Imperial Commissioner to Nauru decided that collecting taxes in copra would be facilitated if the island territory is divided into districts. As one old good saying goes, divide and conquer. Who shall govern those districts? Of course, the most influential figures which lived in each area, the wealthiest and the most respected. Thus, it comes as no surprise that most of the district's chiefs were from the most populous Inuit tribe. Bottom line, districts have nothing to do with Nauruan tribes which were up to 13 at different points of time. Their number is shown in green circles on the chart. Starting from 1908 and until nowadays, one can say with 100% accuracy that the number of districts totals 14, but was it the same during the first 18 years of administrative division? Only in 1904 it was mentioned that there were 6 districts which are shown in blue circles. However, looking at the number of chiefs shown in orange circles, whose numbers varied between 9 and 14, it appears that original districts didn't have borders as such but were just conglomerations of hamlets under a certain chief, and these hamlets were handed over from one chief to another until the borders were finally set sometime between 1904 and 1908. There was a notion by Paul Hambrew that since ancient times, Nauru has numbered 14 districts, each of which was originally owned by a tribe. However, it turns out to not be the case, as districts were a relatively new invention of the Germans to facilitate the administration tasks. Part 3. Number of tribes. Traditionally, Nauruans divide themselves into matrilineal tribes or clans, what is symbolized on Nauruan flag in a form of 12-pointed star. How many tribes were initially there and what was their origin is a riddle inside of Enigma. However, it is commonly accepted that during the colonial era, there were 12 tribes, 2 of which are already extinct. Were there really 12 tribes? No. There were definitely 13, maybe even more. The tribe's origin is a hodgepodge of legends, myths, and patches of historical records. Yet, what is definitely clear, the first clans were formed by people sailed or drifted to Nauru from other parts of the Pacific, and later, splitting, merging, vanishing, mixing with escapees and beachcombers. Civil wars in 1878 to 1888, which were between districts or even hamlets rather than among tribes, reduced population from approximately 1400 to 900 and could have been the reason for emerging of new tribes like Inuit, Amangun, Eouwa, Ingwadara, Ainobau, and for bringing some tribes to the brink of extinction, like Irutsi, Iwi, Ainobau. If one belongs to a certain tribe and is at war with someone else from the same tribe, would they be keen to say that they belong to the same matrilineal tribe? Perhaps not. Spellings of tribes' names are something that can make any foreign head faint. Even nowadays, different people might spell their tribe differently. 13th tribe, which is Ainobau, was mentioned at least 3 times, in 1889 by Eggert, in 1894 by Steinbach, and in 1907 by Anthony Brandeis. Should it be considered in Nauruan flag as the 13-pointed star? Good question. Iwi and Irutsi tribes were becoming extinct at the same time, with the last members perishing between 1925 to 1926. As to Eouwa from Mining, who died on September 30, 1932, aged 56, he is allegedly the last member of Iwi or Irutsi tribe. Interestingly, in the 2002 and 2011 census, there were several people reported as Irutsi and Iwi members, perhaps by mistake. Part 4. Iwi and Irutsi. There are not many documents found concerning Iwi and Irutsi. Even when these tribes perished, there was not much recorded. Why was that? But people did talk. Sometimes stories, legends and myths can be consistent and fill the gaps where there is no documental evidence. But in case of these 2 tribes, nothing is consistent, everything is quite controversial and gives a rather distorted picture. One of the frequently told stories about Iwi tells us that there were 2 Iwi clans living in Anabara and Eju. During the Civil War 1878 to 1888, Iwi from Eju killed all members from Anabara. That angered other tribes, and so they were expelled to a cave in Eju, where they lived without access to fire, consuming only raw food. This led to rumors that they practiced cannibalism. After other tribes learnt that remaining Iwi steal the catch from fishermen of Eju, they blocked the entrance of the cave and set it on fire. All Iwi were suffocated except the son of Iwi chief, who was warned the day before the ambush and escaped with 2 other Iwi girls. This cave is sealed even today. As to Irutsi, allegedly, they were not favored by other tribes as they kept violating one of the main taboos on Nauru to not marry members of the same tribe. The last members left Nauru with some traders to Yap and Kosrae. During Australian administration of Nauru, population census was conducted on yearly basis which included tribe information. From 1922 until 1925 there was only 1 Iwi and 1 Irutsi reported, both living in Eouwa. Starting from 1926 census, these 2 tribes were gone. Other sources of information on Iwi and Irutsi include notes of Jung in 1897 and Ernest Stephen in 1900. In 1897, Jung reported that 2 of the Nauru tribes, Irutsi and Iwi, with a total of only 16 members, are expected to die out completely in the foreseeable future because the female members are too old to be able to produce offspring. However, it doesn't look credible for Irutsi because there were 2 Irutsi children born in 1898 and 1905, and both were girls. There is no Irutsi found in Death Register 1915 to 1940, so those Irutsi living in 1915 could have left Nauru, or there was only 1 Irutsi. Population statistics for Iwi is very limited. There is no information besides notes of Jung in 1897, Ernest Stephen in 1900, and censuses in 1921 to 1926. Even as Ainobao is not a subject of this chapter, it is interesting to note the limited statistics on this also extinct tribe in comparison to Iwi and Irutsi. Regardless, the information coming from Jung that in 1897 Iwi and Irutsi had only 16 members with women old enough to be able to conceive, there were several Irutsi families found in the archives. According to Birth Register and Catholic archives, this Irutsi woman had 3 sons and 1 daughter born between 1892 and 1898. All children were registered in Oro. The main question here is, what happened to a girl named Ekwed Maria who was born in 1898? Did she die before 1915 as her name was not found in the death register 1915 to 1940? Or did she leave Nauru before 1921 and Irutsi bloodline continues somewhere in the world? According to the Catholic records, an Irutsi girl, Epabo Christina, was born in 1905 and registered in Oro. This makes her the last Irutsi female member born in Nauru. What was her fate? Did she die some time before 1915, or did she leave Nauru before 1921? The birth register, which might be incomplete, holds only 1 record on children of Ibarima, an Irutsi woman, which is a boy Karu Simon born in 1892 and registered in Oro. However, there are rumors that Ibarima had 2 other sons before, from another man. One of which is Eouwa of Menin, what could make him an Irutsi member, but Thomas Cude mentions his name as the last Iwi member. Who to trust? People's Talk or a police officer who spent many years on Nauru? And isn't the 16-year difference in Eouwa and Karu Simon birth significant? Or was Eouwa adopted by Ibarima, which was a very common practice in Nauru those days? An important observation, all 6 Irutsi children born between 1892 and 1905 in these 3 families were registered in Oro, where the last Irutsi member lived according to censuses 1921 to 1926. Part 5. Eouwa. In his notes on Nauru, Henry Maud wrote that the last member of Iwi was the hospital orderly Eouwa, who died in 1932, and there was a small stone on his grave recording it. Maud drew this information from Thomas Cude. In 2023 there was a lengthy post on Facebook full of confusing details about Irutsi, where the same Eouwa was mentioned as the last Irutsi tribesman. Yet, many other details of Eouwa life were true facts, like his workplace, date of death. It was also mentioned that he was buried outside his family house in a Terabok. Eouwa of Menin was appointed as a caretaker in the government hospital and European cemetery on September 25, 1922, when Thomas Griffiths was in office as administrator of Nauru. In 1927 he was part of medical orderly establishment in the government hospital, which can also be seen on the administration hospital staff picture taken in 1930, 2 years prior to his death. Aged 56, Eouwa died on September 30, 1932 in the administration hospital. Estate of Eouwa described on October 14 same year was anything but lines of word nil, no heirs, no will left, no money in bank, no property. One line is quite important there, all his land property has been disposed of. What lands did he have and whom did he give them away to? On the date of his death, Eouwa had no heirs. However, he had children from 2 women. First 2 children were from a leper Idarakui who died in 1920 during influenza outbreak. Their daughter Elizabeth was born in 1909 and was registered in Minang, while their son Leo born in 1912 was registered in Oro. Again Oro as the last Irutsi whereabouts. Seems both children didn't survive, although there are no records found in the death register 1915 to 1940. Later on, Idarakua moved to Yeren, then Bo, and gave birth to a girl named Rose in 1915 from another man, yet she died at 1 year old. Another fact from Idarakua life: she lived first in Minang, then in Yeren, then in Bo. How did it happen that her and Eouwa's son Leo was registered in Oro? From his second wife, Eouwa had 1 or 2 sons. While there are records about his son born in 1915 and registered in Minang, the information about Ebenet raises question. Some people say Ebenet was another Eouwa son from the same wife. However, a girl with exactly the same name was born in Minang in 1914 to 1915 by a woman who could be an Eouwa cousin, as people say. Bottom line, it seems all Eouwa children died. When Eouwa died, he did not have in possession any land. However, he did have 3 portions of lands in Minang, according to the Land Register 1910 to 1912, and he was the sole proprietor of those portions. A Terabok was one of those. In the same land register, in the heirs column there are only question marks across Eouwa's name, while he had 2 sons born in 1909 and 1912. In a later land register dated 1928, all Eouwa portions of lands in Minang are shown as co-owned with a woman named Ikibi. Who was she? Those 3 portions of lands in Minang that Eouwa owned by himself in 1910 to 1912, and then co-owned with Ikibi in 1928, in 1940 solely belonged to Ikibi. It appears that he added her as a co-owner and before his death gave his rights away to her. Why would have he done so? And from whom Eouwa inherited those land portions in the first place? Ikibi was born in 1902 and there are no records found in birth registers to shed light about her parents. It doesn't look like she could be an Eouwa spouse due to her age. Could she be his daughter from unrecorded Eouwa wife from Ino tribe? What can be said for sure? She was quite important to Eouwa, so he gave away all his property to her. Thomas Cude mentioned that Eouwa was buried next to his family house in Minang and there was a stone on his grave mentioning that he was the last Iwi. While someone on Facebook mentions that Eouwa was buried outside his home in a Terabok. Could his tombstone be still there? As of March 2024, no tombstone is found on the portion 200 in Minang. This is, perhaps, due to cleanup done in 2018 and the tombstone could still be in one of the mounds found on that land. Some residents still remember a grave below this frangipani tree around some 20 years ago, and tomb skirting is still scattered around. Was Eouwa last Iwi or last Irutsi? Perhaps, we might never know as he carried his secret to the grave which perished. When was the first encounter of Nauruans with Europeans and when was Nauru first charted on the Pacific maps? What are the true origins of Nauruan tribes and were there more than 13? What are the stories of extinct Ainobao, Iwi and Irutsi tribes? Who was their last member or could their bloodline still continue somewhere? Who was that mysterious Eouwa? These and some other questions might get their answers one day. Or might not and will remain a mystery.